So we're actually going to look at a deep dive into posture, what we might be considering healthy posture, what we might be considering compensatory posture, and what impact this might have on the horse's health, the hoof proportions, how we might recognize a healthy hoof, and how we might promote healthy hooves and healthy posture. And then at the end, we'll just look briefly at a short case study where we took an integrative approach to helping the horse begin its journey in developing healthy posture and hoof proportions. So what is posture? Posture versus conformation. I think it can sometimes get a little confusing. So conformation are the kind of bare bones of the human or the horse's body. This is the framework which the soft tissues connect to and which contain some of the organs.
Oh, that needs to make note.
And that doesn't change very much, although it can due to wear and tear or due to different forces. But when we talk about posture, we're actually talking about how the skeletal system is oriented. And this can change rapidly and has a big bearing on the horse's conformation potentially. But it's important to realise that we do actually have quite an influence over posture and therefore conformation. So what influences posture? I think posture is considered in the physical domain, but it really is a part of our mental domain. So how we feel and our emotional state can actually change how we move. So if we think about if we're feeling in pain, how we might change our posture to accommodate that pain or to protect ourselves. But likewise, if we're fearful or if we have anxiety, we might carry ourselves differently, both because of how we feel, but also because of that physiological response to stress in the body. So in horses, it's the same as it is in humans. It's a very complex process, the generation of posture, and the control center of the horse's brain is really what's generating most of that horse's posture. And it receives information from the horse's body, both from the environment outside, but also the environment on the inside of the body. So why might posture matter? Well, most domestic horses are ridden. So if we're wanting to sit on the horse and we want that horse to accept the rider's body weight, then it's important that the posture is as good as it can be to support that conformation and framework so that the horse can move around with minimum effort and actually perform at its best and for the longest time possible. So if we think of this horse here, he's carrying a saddle, she's carrying tack, she's being held by a lead rope, so there's influence to her head and neck. The surface she's standing on, she's receiving information from this. So just looking at a horse in its everyday environment, whether it's interacting with a human or not, we can see postural influences, and we'll look a bit deeper into that. So posture matters because horses are so large that they have to be very careful in energy expenditure. A lot of the energy of a horse is just utilised in standing up, let alone moving around. And we're defaulted to stand upright with respect to gravity. We cannot avoid the force of gravity. So a neural or healthy posture has to be very energy efficient, but it has to be safe to stop the animal or the human from falling over. When we are in coherence with gravity, when our bones aren't aligned correctly, or our tissues aren't aligned correctly, there's a cost on the body, and that's usually wear and tear, tissue damage, and lameness. And I think it's important to bear in mind that horses spend up to 22 hours a day just standing around in domestication. So how the horse is standing could mean the difference between wear and tear just from standing around if the posture's not good, versus a horse that's resting properly and adequately prepared for the work that's been asked for it to do by the human. So postural input is received to the brain via many different places all over the horse's body. First of all, there are muscles in the upper neck and the poll that are giving information about the position of the horse's head and neck. And then we have the eyes, obviously visual information tells the horse where it is in space and time in relation to the Earth's plane. We all know about horses that don't travel very well if they can't see some sort of ground surface outside of the container that they're traveling in, and some horses do better facing backwards where they can see the road and all sorts of things. So the eyes have a big part to play. And then the temporomandibular joint, the TMJ joint at the top of the horse's jaw, where the jaw attaches to the skull, there are a huge number of proprioceptors in the joint that inform the horse, again, where it is in space and time, about where the jaw is hung in relation to gravity. And the teeth have a big part to play in that. And then we have joint mechanoreceptors, proprioceptors in and around the horse's joints that feel tension and pressure, that give information about where the horse is, again, in terms of the ground surface. And then we have vestibular organs. So the inner ear is an incredibly complex organ, which informs, again, where the horse's head is in space and time. There are also pelvic mechanoreceptors to inform about where the upper limb is in relation to the skeletal system. And then clearly we have mechanoreceptors in the muscles and the tendons that are feeling stretch or relaxation even. And then we have a huge number of mechanoreceptors in the skin, but predominantly in the horse's hoof, which are feeling the ground surface. And just as a reminder there at the bottom, posture is both consciously and unconsciously generated, and emotions influence the whole system. So just for example, you know, a lot of these things are traveling, the information is traveling through the nervous system, and you don't have to think about your posture, but we can consciously think about our posture. Whether horses consciously think about posture or not, I'm not quite sure, but surely their emotional states dictate. So for example, a stallion who's been approached by another younger stallion, he's going to start changing his posture and moving in a different way to signal to that competitor that, hey, you know, I'm the stronger guy, you better stay away. So that, you could say, is a conscious act. So postural input, Dr. Karen Calvin is considered a world leader in postural rehabilitation. She considers these three areas to be the most important factors in compensatory posture. So I've put in red there, number one, the hoof mechanoreceptors. So the information received from the hoof, from the ground, but also the structures in the hoof and how they are aligned are given very, very important information to the horse about how it might stand. And we will talk more detail about that. And then second of all, she considers the TMJ joint and the teeth incredibly important in providing information. So just as an experiment, if you all just want to let your lower jaw hang forward and just feel how you might change your posture subconsciously, and then do the opposite. If you bring your lower jaw back, how does that alter your posture? You're either going to lean forward or feel like you want to lean back. And this is similar to the information the horse is receiving. So how the teeth actually meet in the jaw provides incredible information about how the jaw is hung onto the skull. And the jaw position literally can alter the horse's posture. So dentition is a major factor in keeping horses performing in sound as well, not just from a nutritional perspective, but because of the postural input the TMJ has. And then number three, she considers the muscles in the upper neck and the poll as being very, very important, giving information about where the head and neck is. So if, as a rider, we're riding a horse that's creating tension in those muscles, then, you know, we need to be considering what influence we have on that horse's posture, because a number of proprioceptors are actually there. So hoof mechanoreceptors, they are literally covering the entire surface of the horse's hoof. They're in the wool, they're in the sole, and they're in the softer, more cartilaginous tissues in the caudal foot. In fact, they're most densely packed in the frog and within, actually inside the digital cushion itself. And these are providing information about the landing surface and the orientation of the horse's foot on the ground plane. And Dr. Bowker, I've got a quote there, he says, the horse's foot is a primary avenue for the horse to obtain information about the physical features of the ground surface upon which it stands and moves. And he actually considers the horse's foot as a neurosensory organ, which is very important, which we will come to that. So thinking about the shape of the horse's foot and the orientation of the structures within, it is going to be giving different information to the brain about the terrain underneath it. So not only the slope of the terrain, but actually pinpoint pressure is going to cause the horse to shift its weight and move differently in order to avoid injury. So we need to consider what sort of appliances we're actually putting on the horse's hoof and how that impacts proprioception, posture and balance, and therefore soundness. So if we're loading the hoof with a peripherally loading shoe, it doesn't have the same properties as the hoof wall, and it's changing where the pressures are being received from the ground surface. So that might change how the horse moves according to that information that's being received. So we have a lot of influence on the horse's hoof by how we allow the horse's foot to wear and how we actually trim it and shoe it, and therefore the horse's posture. So postural influences in domestication. Clearly there is hoof care. How the foot is trimmed and how the foot is cared for and shod is going to change the information received. And as we'll soon learn later on, it actually provides information about how the horse perceives it is standing either on a slope uphill or downhill. And that's mostly to do with the alignment of the phalanges or the bones within. Dental care, clearly. In the wild, the horse would be chewing, it would be having different food, it would be having different eating habits, and it would wear the teeth in a different manner than in domestication. This is why we have to address the horse's dentition and avoid malocclusions. Diet. So again, what the horse is eating is going to change the plane of the teeth and how they wear. The management of the horse, what kind of management style do we have? How do we train and ride that horse? And how do we handle the horse? If we think about all of those muscles that are in the upper neck and the density of those proprioceptors, if we're kind of hauling the horse around by its head all the time, or we're putting unnecessary pressure on the horse's head, we're inadvertently changing the signals, and we could have an impact on that horse's posture and soundness. So just a closer look at management. How we keep our horses is influential both on the foot balance, the foot health, the metabolism of the horse, and the health and well-being of the horse, not only in terms of things like nutrition, but stress. So how do we feed our horses? Are they in dry lots? Are they eating on a natural position, eating grass? Or are they eating from small hold hay nets hung up, and are they constantly pulling on the necks? How does this change the wear and patting of the teeth? Are the horses allowed to move around, or are they constrained to stables? What's the physical environment underfoot? Is it an environment that's constantly wearing the hoof too low? Is it providing constant information to the hoof? Is it making the horse sore that it then has to change its posture to avoid that? And I've mentioned compassion versus passion. We're very passionate about compassion in our organisation. And I think it's fair to say that everybody here is passionate about horses, but are we compassionate? Are we actually looking at the horse and considering the needs of that animal in comparison to what is genetically engineered to live like? And are we inadvertently creating stress, digestive issues, and changing the biomechanics of the animal just by placing it in domestication? And on that note, I just want to touch a little on posture, stress and digestion. So a lot of the controls of the animal and information coming and going to actually receive information and create functions in the body come through the autonomic nervous system, which is kind of the unconscious, non-thinking processes that go on. And we can really broadly look at that in terms of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic being the fight or flight, where blood's diverted to muscles, where we've got slowing down of digestion, and it's quite high energy to live in that state because we're getting ready to be ready to run away. And on the flip side of that, we've got the parasympathetic nervous system, which is considered the rest, repair, digest and breed mode. This requires less energy as long as the horse is in a neutral or a neural posture. It promotes microcirculation, and it also is an energy preserving mode. So the horse is constantly fluctuating between these two states normally, and it would do in the wild, not because it's constantly stressed or it's constantly resting, but there is a natural fluctuation between these states just to perform normal functions. But we really want to be kind of looking at the parasympathetic nervous system and promoting more of this to have more relaxation through the horse's muscles, and to have more of a digesting state when the horse should be resting and digesting. So therefore enters the enteric nervous system, which is a whole part of this autonomic nervous system. And more we hear about the horse's microbiome health. Ulcers seem to be becoming more and more prevalent. And although I can't find any real published data about this, for the last 12 years plus, I've been looking at postural changes in horses and what seem to be microbiome health issues, ulcers, call it what you will, but things kind of going wrong in the digestive system and it creating postural changes. And I think the horse can get into a bit of a depleted state where you know, the horse has got gut ache, it's having to change its posture, it's now in a stressful place because it can't rest properly in that compensatory posture position, which then creates more call for higher levels of nutrition. But if the gut isn't working properly, it can't digest and absorb those. So that's kind of my take on what might be going on in horses in domestication, where things are going wrong a little bit with the digestive system. And there's a lot more that's beyond the scope of this talk, but anyone who wants to have a chat with that, I'm happy to do so outside of the scope of this talk. So ideal posture, quite simply, the more energy efficient way for a horse to stand is the limbs perpendicular to the ground plane. So here we can see a skeleton on the left, and the cannon bones are perpendicular to the ground. And this is the most energy efficient way for a horse to stand. And here we have a 21-year-old Connemara pony here at our centre. He has quite healthy hooves, quite nice posture. He hasn't in the past, but he does have some health challenges, but we do maintain his health and try and keep him well to the best of our ability. So in our consultation process, we actually assess posture and attitude before we even look at the horse's hooves, because that gives us a lot of information about potentially the emotional state, the digestive state, and whether or not the horse is going to have some hoof abnormalities. So ideal posture, I think nature doesn't make mistakes, and I think domestication is on the whole very stressful for horses, and it's a poor imitation that we generally provide for them. And I've got a zebra rug there on a horse, which is actually thought to keep horseflies away. So that's one theory as to why the horses in the wild, like the zebras, have these stripes. But either or, you can see that these zebras are showing healthy posture. The cannon bones are pretty perpendicular to the ground. They're a little bit alert there, but they're ready to kind of run off without being overly alert or excited. They're not wasting any energy just standing around. And here we can see a horse in domestication. This is actually an advert for this rug, but can you see how the cannon bones are not perpendicular to the ground on the front feet? And here we have a bunch of Mustangs. Are they wild or are they not? I'm not quite sure, but they do kind of live a wild life. And here you can see that, again, their legs are very, very perpendicular to the ground. They have a semi-interested posture. They're looking across whatever's going on over there. They don't look tense. They don't look like they're about to run off, but they've got all 4 feet on the ground in a very energy efficient manner. And just consider for a moment the diet that these horses are eating and how many miles they have to travel to get food and to get water. Very, very different environment from your horse or mine. So here we have a horse with compensatory posture. That's probably the most common posture that I see on the horses that I visit. And this is sometimes called goat on a rock. They're sort of camped under behind, and it looks like they're leaning over the front end. and not one cannon bone is actually perpendicular to the ground. This is the same thoroughbred mare that had the Western saddle on at the start. This is actually one of our horses that we still have in our care. She's 20 now. She had rehabilitative shoes on at this time that didn't actually work. But here we can see very prominent chest muscles. We can't see the muscles in the back, but I can advise you that they are quite tight in the sort of semitendinosus muscles, biceps muscles at the back. She's actually got quite a tight neck. She's grimacing, actually. She's making a face. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but you can see that there's sometimes an altered croup height, a change in angle of the pelvis, or a change in the wither height. Sometimes the withers actually get lower. But typically, what to look out for is this camped under posture, where the legs aren't perpendicular to the ground, and sometimes it's actually hard to stand these horses up straight. So how do we promote healthy ideals? Dentistry, that might need to be included with craniosacral therapy or some sort of integrative therapy that looks at the whole horse. You might need pain management to break that cycle. You might need postural rehabilitation. Again, looking at diet and management, a lot of these horses do respond with dietary changes that is intended to promote gut health. This horse, I don't think he had real GI. I think I mentioned it, but the supplements did make some improvements, but primarily with this horse, it was actually changing foot balance. So breaking the cycle is important. There will be different intervention points which will be appropriate for each horse, and sometimes you just have to start with what you think is the most obvious and see what happens, but know that there are different ways in which these horses can be supported. And usually it takes teamwork. I always say to my clients, teamwork's a dream work, and yeah, that's really cheesy, but it's actually really true. Hoof care and posture. This is before and after photographs of our 21-year-old Connemara pony with Cushing's disease. So he's on Pergolide every other day, but he manages to grow really nice hooves. And this is what he looks like before a trim, and this is what he looks like after a trim. So can you see how he's leaning over the front end and how the hind legs are underneath, and how he's much more relaxed after? And that's just one trim. And Dr. Clements, again, the postural rehabilitation expert, her quotation here: for many horses, if they do not have concurrent problems with their teeth or neck, correctly balancing their feet will instantaneously fix their posture. And I have seen this quite a lot. It's just whether or not we can actually change the balance in the feet. And as a reductive process, I'm a trimmer in effect. I can't put shoes on a horse. I'm not able to do that. I'm not a farrier, so I can only follow a reductive process. So sometimes we don't get big postural changes early enough, and I have to tag with a farrier and say, can you help this horse, because we need to make bigger changes than I can achieve. So what are we looking for with the ideal hoof shape? I think it's very important to know that there is no one ideal hoof. There are no set of parameters by which one would consider a hoof ideal. There are basically proportions, relationships, and guidelines. And I think we're getting closer with the increase in documentation and research that's available in understanding really what we should be looking for. The hoof should be assessed with the foot on the ground, ideally on a level surface. And I always look at the posture first and see how the limb is orientated to the body and how the hoof is orientated to the limb. So we're looking for a straight HPA, which is a hoof pastern axis, basically a line dropped from the fetlock joint through the pastern down to the ground. The hoof ball should be parallel to that line, and that is related to the palmar or the plantar pedal bone angle, and that basically means the angle at which the last foot in the bone, which is the pedal bone or the third phalanx, or P3 as it's commonly called, it's the angle at which that sits in relation to the ground. And some say it should be between 2 and 5 degrees. Others say it should be between 5 and 8 degrees. I couldn't say for certain which one of those is right. I'm inclined to think that it should be more than 2 degrees. And it could be a lot higher. And that's actually determined by the horse's conformation. So a horse with a very short upright pastern might actually have a naturally higher pedal bone angle if it's actually allowed to be that way. So there should also be appropriate vertical depth to the foot with the correct sole conformation. So the sole gives us a lot of information about what's actually going on inside the foot, and we can always confirm things on x-rays, but there should be an appropriate depth between the pedal bone and the ground. The dorsal wall, that is the wall at the front of the foot where the toe is. And when we consider the angle at the dorsal wall and the angle at the heel, it ideally should be within 5 degrees of each other. The hoof in this diagram is not quite within 5 degrees, but it's close to. This is a previous low-grade chronic laminitic pony that's now very sound, and he's going through some interesting changes and becoming sounder. His hoof wall angle will be close to 55 degrees. And then ideally, when we're looking at the proportions of the front of the foot to the back of the foot, if we drop a line from the center of articulation of the coffin joint, which will be approximately where the yellow line changes about 2/3 of the way down, there's a very, very slight change in angle there. That's approximately the center of rotation. If we drop a line straight down to the ground, there should be around 50-50 heel to toe proportion around that location. So this pony is about 40% heel, 60% toe, which is acceptable for a barefoot horse. And if we were to look at a radiograph, we actually want alignment between the capsule and the phalanges in all dimensions. So not just looking at it from the side, we want to look from the front, we want to look in all dimensions and have a marry up between the capsule and those phalanges, the phalanges being the first, second and third phalanx, or P1, P2, P3. This is a photograph borrowed from Daisy Bicking, and here we can see a quite healthy foot. So we're looking inside the foot now from the side, and the pink circle is the centre of rotation there of the coffin joint. And there's that line drop down, and we can see here that we're again about 40-60. We've got appropriate vertical depth underneath the pedal bone. We've got a nice thick sole going on there. The heel and the toe are definitely within 5 degrees and probably around 55. And we have a reasonably straight hoof past an axis. So this is a reasonably healthy, high scoring hoof. And we can see there that the pedal bone angle is at 6 degrees. And here's another look. This is the same pony as before. This is still improving. We haven't quite got ideal proportions here. We've got slightly longer toe or more foot in front of the bony column than we have ideally behind, where we would want it around that centre of rotation. And we can see that the heels are further forward, but I used this slide so I could illustrate the challenges that we have as hoof care professionals. So a lot of people talk about the heels needing to be back at the widest part of the frog and the frog being in ground contact. But on this horse, if I were to lower the heels, they would come further back because the heels grow forward. So as we trim them, they come further back. But I would actually lower the palmar angle and create lameness in this horse. I would actually end up lowering the palmar angle and putting strain through all of those joints, and I would not have alignment between the capsule and the phalanges. So we have to work slowly to rehabilitate these feet to have all of the ideals kind of come together. And it is a little bit art and science, and it takes great study of the foot documentation and learning to kind of muddle your way through it. And then fortunately there isn't a guidebook on A to B on how to do it. But this horse is definitely still improving, and the heels are coming back, but we did it without losing depth to the foot and making them sore. So poor hoof proportions, what might they actually be? Well, low palmar angles, or plantar as they're called in the hind feet. When it's very low past 0, it's called negative palmar angle. That will be associated, a low palmar angle will be associated with a broken back hoof past an axis. And a broken forward one is when we actually have an excessively high palmar or plantar angle, and we've actually got what looks like a rotation in the other direction. We've got an excessive angle in the other direction. So hoof distortions like flares or a misshaping hoof, pathologies, diseases, pedalostitis, laminitis, things associated with unhealthy pressures in the feet, if you like. a mismatch between the capsule and the phalanges, thin soles, compensatory posture, lameness, undesirable behaviour or attitude changes, and then footiness, which is what is sometimes used in the barefoot world, which I call lameness. And I think it's important to also reiterate that poor hoof proportions and the signs of these are seen in both barefoot and shod horses. So having a horse barefoot is not going to automatically create healthy feet. A lot of the horses we see are actually barefoot horses that have very poor hoof proportions and are struggling. So a few tips from me. In order to see these hoof proportions, we've got to want to look at them. And that means getting your camera on the ground and taking some good quality photographs before and after every single trim, and really looking at what changes have occurred in that horse's environment, the rider, the physical environment. Has there been dietary changes? Has my trim or a person's shoeing created an influence? And we've got to be really honest and take our emotions out of the picture and dig deep and see, you know, what are the influences that I have had, that we have had on domestication on this horse, and what can we do about it? We actually take measurements with Metron Hoof, but you could use a Kiko, and there are other software and handy tools out there where you can take some measurements of the horse's foot to help your documentation. And above all, question everything, including your hoof carer. You know, why is my heel here? Why is that there? Why is this changing? You know, what does it mean? And here's a few horses. I've picked some horses that have sort of had quite dramatic changes over about a 3-month period. So the horse here, it's an adult Appaloosa mare. We've got a broken back hoof pastanaxis. Can you see there that the hoof here, that line should actually follow the shape of the dorsal hoof wall, would not be following the angle of the pastern, and that would indicate a low palmar angle of the pedal bone. So the back of the pedal bone in this horse is too low. And this horse actually had chronic abscessing, and you can actually see a part of the hoof wall that's broken off there where an abscess has erupted. So we don't have alignment between the bones and the capsule, so there's going to be strain. And in this horse, it's manifested as abscesses. And there we see 3 months after, simply following a reductive process, trimming and a few supplement and dietary changes that are recommended at the time, we have a straighter hoof pastanaxis, we have a much more upright toe and heel, and they're matching each other more closer, not quite within 5 degrees. We have a 60-40 heel to toe ratio, and most importantly, we have no more abscesses and a much healthier palmar P3 angle. And here we have another horse. This was a 5-year-old warbler who couldn't hold shoes, so it wasn't an intentional act to remove the shoes. It was simply, we don't know what to do, she's not holding the shoes, but it gave us an opportunity to rehabilitate her, and she had some very dramatic changes in a 3-month period and came back very sound. Slightly similar, broken back hoof pastern angle, better heel to toe ratio, and the seeded toe and the broken wall disappeared. Most importantly, we have a much healthier palmar P3 angle. This is the same horse from the underside, and there you can see the dramatic proportional changes. We have a much shorter toe, we have a much healthier frog. You can actually see the surface area, weight-bearing surface area of the wall. She's still a little weak in the quarters. It takes time to rehabilitate horses, but I think it's quite clear to appreciate there the positive changes that can be achieved through dietary and also postural rehabilitation. We did involve a therapist as well. Here we have the same horse that I showed previously with the Western saddle on. This is Sun now. This is her hind foot. This is the superimposed radiograph just taken 2 weeks ago, and here's the outer hoof capsule. We can see here that there is a negative angle to the pedal bone, which is what we anticipated. This horse simply does no longer grow heel. We cannot get any growth in the heel, but we can get a little growth in the toe. So whilst we've got adequate height in the front of the foot, we're not able to get adequate height in the back. And I believe from seeing various venograms that this is to do with changes to the blood flow in the back of the foot, because of those pressures changing the property, maybe the property of the cartilage, the property of the bars. They're just no longer able to kind of stand up and receive that sort of nourishment. So the pressure is affecting the blood flow. And this is quite common in both barefoot and shod horses, this negative palmar angle, and it can be in the front foot or the hind feet, but I think it's getting a little unnoticed in the hind feet because the horse doesn't appear to have, and here you'll see, she doesn't actually have a broken back hoof past an angle. She's actually got a straight hoof past an angle. So in the hind feet, I think it's not being recognised as often as it should be. And here we've got the full radiograph, and we can see the misalignment in effect between these phalanges. P2, P3 isn't too bad, but there's quite a change in angle between P1 and P2. And clearly this is very low with a very thin sole at the back. And there you can see the angles on the outside. Very underrun heel, very short heel. The heel height's less than 1 inch. And they're quite important to also consider is the heel bull distance. So how far underrun is the heel? And also not just in relation to the foot, but in relation to the rest of the horse. So if we were to drop a line down from, say, the middle of the fetlock joint, we haven't really got much support there for the bony column and for the rest of the horse. So this is a slide borrowed from the Equine Documentalist. This is where he was talking about posture and negative palmar angle in the hoof. And this was research, these were papers published specifically on pathologies associated with negative palmar angle. And Mansman there was commenting that horses that present with a camped under posture typically with the hind foot where there is a negative palmar angle. But here you can see that there's research about various areas of pathology and pain associated with it. This is an excellent post, by the way, at the Equine Documentalist's website. If you're interested to look at that, it's pretty groundbreaking. So there was a paper published in 2019 looking at the correlation between negative palmar angle in the hind feet and lameness. There's lots of information available about pathologies and lameness in the front feet, typically heel pain and navicular, but not so much evidence on hind feet lameness. So this study was on a total of 132 horses presenting with lameness. The majority of and they all had confirmed low or negative, well, they had low palmar angles. What they actually find in the lame group of 132 horses, there was a mean combined angle of both left and hind hooves of minus 2.1 degrees. And in the control group, which is the horses without hind limb lameness, the combined angle of the pedal bone was 3.2 degrees. So then they broke it down further and said, well, where is the lameness? 78 horses had stifle lameness, 31 hock lameness, 22 had proximal suspensory region lameness, which is this suspensory apparatus beneath the hock, and then 8 horses had multiple hind limb lamenesses. So it was very clear that there is an association between low plantar P3 angles and concomitant lameness, and that lameness was actually above the foot. So why is negative palmar angle influencing posture? I don't want you to do it right now. Well, you can if you want. When you get the opportunity, stand up and see if you can wedge something underneath your toes, which kind of mimics a low palmar angle in the horse's foot. And then I want you to feel the sensation in your body of first of all, the physical sensation. What is it that you actually feel? What is it that your body actually does when it's in that position? But also think about how you feel emotionally about that. And I think what's happening is in the front feet, when there is a low palmar angle, there is increased tension in the mechanoreceptors in the flexor tendons. So this will be the equivalent of you feeling pressure up the back of your legs when you stand on an incline with your toe raised higher than your heel. So the horse then receives the information and thinks, oh, I'm on a hill. And then it inclines forward, changes its posture. And to compensate from that, the hind end has to tuck under, and the force is then put down through the heels rather than the center of the foot. And then we get into a negative cycle where the pressure in the heel creates a loss of health in the back of the hind feet, which then pushes the hind feet further under because the palmar angle gets lower in the hind feet. And then that pushes the front end further forward, which puts pressure on the toe, but actually it increases the pressure up the flexor tendons, and so on and so on. And I think this is placing horses at real risk of tissue breakdown and injuries, be that the SI joint, the stifles, the hocks, the muscles, the tendons. But most importantly, these horses are stressed and they're using a lot of energy just to stand around or rest for 22 hours a day. So in our experience, hoof distortions and low palmar angles can be multifactorial in the manifestation. And restoring them is not as simple as just doing any one thing. We have to really find the intervention point and work it out. And again, Dr. Gelman says, posture is a prevalent influence on soundness, and lameness comes from how the horse stands for 22 hours of the day. So we have a massive influence on hoof proportions and health. The assessment therefore leads to choosing an intervention to support a horse, which might be do nothing, self-trim, it might be change the physical environment, it might be to place a shoe on, and there are hundreds of different shoes that will have hundreds of different influences. You might want a boot, pad, or just trim it. There's infinite combinations and influences on the horse's foot. The management of the horse, how we ride it, train it, what the horse wears. Even things as simple as what rugs the horse wears can change how the foot moves, which can change the pressures and create deformities or wear. Then we've got the influence from the other aspect of posture, the teeth, the muscles. I've put the GI tract, I've actually said GI trace, but that should say GI tract. So if the horse has got dysbiosis, is that going to change how he stands and moves? From our perspective, yes, it does. And then stress on the horse. So that stress can be because it's got poor posture for many number of reasons, can influence the metabolism of the horse. And there are more and more horses that have endocrinopathic disorders like PPID, equine Cushing's disease, equine metabolic syndrome. And from our perspective, we see distortion and loss of health to the cartilage in the coronet band, in the caudal foot, changes to the ungular cartilage that actually help create caudal foot collapse, whether that horse is shod or barefoot. So the metabolism of the horse has a massive standing on how healthy they can be. And we've kind of proven that even a horse with, and we've seen it in other horses that have got diagnosis of endocrine disease, you can still have a healthy foot. So how do we promote this? We've mentioned teamwork several times. I really do believe that vets, hoof care professionals and therapists, dentists and owners really should be working together as a team and talking to one another. I think we've got a lot to learn from one another and how these things influence the horse. And then we've got to allow time. It takes a long time to fully rehab and restore to a default, totally relaxed, neutral posture. You need a healthy foot for that. Yes, we can influence the horse's posture by the way that we ride and train it, but is that horse maintaining that healthy posture while it's poodling about for the other 20 hours of the day? We've got to begin with the hoof most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, and work to promote these healthy ideals, especially capsular and phalangeal alignment, which means consideration of the palmar and the plantar P3 angles. Obviously, radiographs are useful. I think they're underutilized. I think we should be looking at radiographs more often and considering those proportions. And then we've got to choose the most appropriate intervention, which promotes those healthy ideals and posture and break that cycle. So if one doesn't provide and maintain healthy posture, then we look for malocclusions and work alongside an equine dentist to correct and maintain them. And then we might need some postural alignment, quite often starting with the head, the TMJ, the neck, because those are highly influenced also by the dentition. And then we might need appropriate physical therapy and rehabilitation. And overall, we have to look at providing a healing environment. Are these horses stressed? Are they resting properly? Do we have healthy metabolism, homeostasis? Are we promoting the autonomic nervous system to be balanced? Are we looking at, having the horse resting properly instead of being in this fight or flight mode? So I just want to talk you through a case study. So this is Snowy. Snowy's an ex-eventer. I call him a pony, but he's actually a horse. and he's owned by a very lovely equine professional who's done a very best for Snowy. So Snowy's had different hoof carers, different farriers, different barefoot and shoeing approaches, and she's really struggled with his feet. They've kind of deformed really slowly over time. So he's now been retired. And here you can see beforehand, there's quite a long toe. This is a front foot. So this is 27th of November. And this is a hind foot. And you can imagine, we don't have x-rays sadly, but you can imagine that the palmar angles, the pedal bones, are going to be very low. Not only low in terms of angle at the back, but actually low as in vertical depth within the capsule. So the sole is very flat and thin. It's like the whole cartilage has collapsed in this horse. Now I want you to look at the posture. Not every horse will actually stand camped under. And I chose Snowy on purpose for this. So there are some hints and clues here. So some horses aren't very good at showing you what is wrong with them, but we can see here there's a difference in shape and outline of the breast muscles, pectoral muscles. And can you see, for Snowy, this is probably a little bit more of an angled pelvis than what he'd normally have. You can't tell here because he's in his winter coat, but there's quite a lot of tension in the muscles in the back of the hind limb and the hindquarters. There is a very, very straight pastern and a very straight hock, and a very upright pastern. And I think some of these horses where the third phalanx, the pedal bone, is very sort of collapsed and low, they're almost pulling themselves out of their hooves, and everything becomes very straight in the hind end, and they kind of pull themselves up in the front end as well. So this was Snowy just over 4 months later. This is his front foot. He's got different proportions now. This is the hind foot. And this is Snowy coming out of his winter coat with some improvements. And we'll look side by side now. So can you see there is a difference in how his limb is sort of attached to the body? Here he's almost tucked under. It's very subtle, but the hind limbs are not perpendicular to the ground. But here he's much more relaxed. He's got them further out. There's more stretch here through the stifle region. The hock isn't quite as tight. This area is more relaxed, but look at the pectoral muscle. This is nowhere near as tight as it was before. And his pelvis is relaxed as well. So there are some subtle changes that if you've got the eyes to see and you're just careful and you keep looking at your horse, you will start to see some signs if things aren't going well. And here are the hooves side by side. They aren't quite the same, what do you call it? They aren't exactly the same distance away from the camera here, so we can't really appreciate the length differences because we've got no way of knowing what lengths these are. But you can appreciate that although this is like a smaller hoof in the background, he's actually got a lot more height above the ground at the heel. The heel is actually longer. It's not as underrun as it was before. And in the hind foot again, you've got a steeper angle to the dorsal wall. You've got a much shorter toe, and we've got an improved heel. And look at the outline of the cartilage as well. So we don't just assess what we see below the hairline, we look above it. And as part of our assessment, we palpate all of this area to gauge the health of the cartilage and the integrity of the caudal hoof tissues. So what do we do with Snowy? Well, I trimmed him every 5 weeks, and I also showed the owner how to do a little bit of maintenance trimming in between times to just keep sneaking the toe back. So that was about managing leverage, really. We did later on use hoof boots and some raised pads, and that really helped him. Right from the beginning, we made some dietary management changes. So Snowy's owner introduced Reline GI, and he's still on it. So she really believes that this has helped him, as do I. It's really took the kind of tension out of his posture, and we're now able to intervene from the foot up and help improve the posture from that end. And because the posture's better, we don't have the unhealthy forces coming down through the heel, so he's now starting to grow heel, and it's restoring itself. We also did some therapy. So he had structure integration movement therapy and craniosacral therapy with Fiona Varian, and he had ongoing dentition. So in the top right corner, you can see that was Snowy's teeth. So we have a malocclusion. Those are the boots that we use. We use flex boots. There's a picture of the reline. And then I'm sort of thinking, well, what else could we do? So recently we've started to explore former hoof. I can't obviously fit former hoof. We'd have to work with a farrier, but this could be a really good option to really support the feet and change those angles and give him some much needed support to get there quicker, really. And then lastly, maybe BEMA, pulsed electromagnetic frequency therapy. This is known to promote microcirculation and support the healing autonomic nervous system more, the parasympathetic nervous system. So all of these things can help with relaxation, they can help with pain relief. It's really about where can we positively intervene and break the cycle. So to summarise, 4 take-home points, really important points. Poor hoof posture and hoof proportions are associated with pathology and lameness, both in the limb and higher up in the limb and the body. This is becoming more and more clear. We can no longer ignore poor proportions in relation to soundness and performance and well-being of these horses. Compensatory posture is usually related to hoof proportions, then the TMJ, the teeth, then the upper neck. Improving the hooves may restore the posture, or you may need to look at other elements. Compensatory posture and poor hoof proportions can be recognised early, and we can positively influence these from many intervention points, but we must break the cycle. And lastly, consider a holistic approach with teamwork, making the dream work between professionals, and support the autonomic nervous system, boost microcirculation, promote good balanced homeostasis and metabolism, and optimize the diet and the GI function as well. Let's not forget the rest of the horse, because they're all interrelated and they're all multi-connected. So I just wanted to finish by sharing a resource page with you. First of all, you can find more information on our website, both in terms of free resources. We offer mentorship, tailor-made courses, general courses, educational events, and we also do consultations as well. And that's for horses in shoes, out of shoes, and we work alongside farriers and barefoot trimmers and other professionals. So we will signpost whichever we feel is the most significant intervention point. Equine documentalist, got lots of free and paid for resources there, really high-end research, evidence-based research on modern farriery and podiatry. There's the link to the paper on negative palmar angle, low palmar angles and hind limb lameness in UK horses. Dr. Karen Gelman's website, excellent resource website. Daisy Bicking, and then lastly Wayne Turner from Progressive Equine Services. And you can also visit us on Facebook and connect with us there as well. And we have a support group. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Becky. First of all, massive thanks for a very informative talk.
You're welcome.
It really is true what you say, no hoof, no horse, particularly.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, when you look at the influence of the posture, and it's you know, obviously very multifactorial when you talk about the teeth, the muscles, GI tract, you know, the influence of stress and its influence on its own about the horse's metabolism, and it just has this knock-on effect.
Massively, massively. I'd love to talk more about that, but you could just go off in so many different directions when you're talking about feet and body. It's just like you say, it's so multifactorial. It's a huge, huge topic. We've just skated across the surface. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, and I think it certainly merits another webinar. Even just talking about psychological and physiological stress in the horse is very relevant to your work, you know, indeed. So, and thank you for that. There is some questions come through, very conscious of time, but we'll get through as many as we can. I'll certainly send them on to you. But and thanks to those send them through on the public chat and the private chat. That's absolutely fine. Probably going through them from as we started the presentation coming through, Becky. So basically, one or two small ones here, but question came in for you, Becky, was, you know, what was the sort of most common influences you sort of routinely see in terms of posture? Is there any pattern to what you see?
The most common pattern is the hind legs tucked under, and sometimes people really don't recognize that until the farrier tells them, oh, I'm having some difficulties bringing the hind leg up or keeping the hind leg off the ground. So it tends to manifest as more of a problem with the hind leg, although you'll usually see the front end, the horse tilting over the front end as well. So that's the biggest thing that we see, is literally the orientation of the limb to the ground.
Yeah. Fantastic.
That's the biggest clue.
Yeah. I'll just rattle through it as we go. In terms of posture, stress, and digestion, domestication, this kind of links to what we just mentioned about the stress factor. But you mentioned microbiome changes and depleted effects on the posture. Do you feel that the GI, that is purely down to the digestive fact, or there's many things going on there?
I think there's many things. Our personal experience of GI tract issues came many years ago when we were living in an area of intensive agricultural activity, and I believed our horses were somehow damaged by flooding on the land where they were, taking in chemicals and also breathing them in every time they sprayed around them. So we had problems with our group of horses from a very young age, and it manifests as what looks like gut sore problems. They always seem to do better when you support the gut. So sometimes you just got to go, well, what is this? If we support the gut and the horse gets better, then that's valuable information, but we just can't prove it. So, I know some customers who have had the tests with Equibiome, where you can get a DNA breakdown of the bacteria and everything living in the gut. And when they do that program, these horses get better, but not all of them do. So we really don't know very much at all about the microbiome. Otherwise, it would be very clear which products we would just use. So, yeah, sometimes you've just got to try stuff and keep a diary. I used to keep a diary of when the sprayers went past, and I couldn't keep my horses away from it. Even in the stable, they would breathe it in, and then I would observe what actually happened. And you can sometimes feel changes in the pulse, changes in the posture, changes in their attitude. They might look a bit depressed. So yeah, I think there's an awful lot of influence on the microbiome. It's a huge topic. Huge.
Yeah, no, great question, that one. Thanks for that, Beccy. Another quick one here. Any specific breed that suffers from poor posture, or is this purely back to the whole domestication influence? I
think it's domestication, full stop. So I've not seen one breed that's had, any particular, they all are capable of standing goat on the rock. I've seen everything from Welsh section Ds to thoroughbreds to Shetland ponies to, every breed, shape or size.
Excellent. Oh, thanks, Bex. This might be another whole presentation, this question, but thanks to the person that sent it in. When we talked about the identification of optimum intervention, the real question was, could you expand on what that looks like? I guess that might be for another topic. But,
yeah. Is that optimum intervention in terms of what you would do with the foot?
Yes.
It's a huge topic. That would depend on what's actually going on. So the assessment would lead to an appropriate intervention. So the first and foremost, the horse's welfare and comfort is paramount. So we need to make the horse comfortable if the horse is in pain. So what does that mean? So what we do in our assessment is we have a kind of a tick box. We look through all of those parameters that I briefly mentioned about the angles. And if we don't have radiographs, we have to use our knowledge and experience of the internal foot and what that looks like on the outside to recognize, do we have a low palm, is the bony column low within the hoof capsule? Do we have a low palmar angle? So I'll sort of go through all of that, check the pulse, feel those structures, watch the horse move and go, right, what's your environment? Because a horse might be fine living out on a sand school, but if that horse has to go live out on a stony turnout, then we're going to need to protect the foot and then promote healthier structures. So we have to look at absolutely everything, which is why our consultation process is 3 hours. So we look at everything in that horse's environment because the influences are lists and lists and lists long. So that leads to the appropriate intervention. And if it means that it needs a shoe, I very rarely recommend a traditional open-heeled shoe because I think that can lead to caudal foot failure in certain circumstances. So I will tend to go, right, okay, this is the shoeing package I think your horse needs, and I'll be very clear why. And then you've got to find a farrier who can support that method if that's the way that you want to go. But it's complex, choosing an intervention. And we also hoof score as well. So we'll actually score the hoof and go, right, what is it you want your horse to do? So if you want your horse to do barefoot eventing, and I've assessed the foot and I've gone, well, it's a 2 out of 6, 6 being absolutely super sound for everything, 4 being the minimum for grassroots eventing. If your horse is a 2, well, something has to change. If you need an artificial orthosis on that foot, a modern shoeing package that mimics the property of the hoof wall and supports that so that you're going to promote healthy ideals, then look at that to get where you need to be if you need to go eventing next week. So a lot of it's about the expectation of the owner and the resources that are available, as well as the environment, the movement of the horse and what it needs as a priority. It's complex.
Yeah, great hints and tips there, Becky. And
I'm happy to do another talk in the future if you want.
Definitely, no, we'll definitely have you back. I think we can squeeze in a couple more here. I'm glad I was paying attention at the time. I held the slide to ask this question. It was slide 18. It was about hoof care and posture. There's a couple of pictures of the Connemara there. It was about the posture change before on the left, and after on the right, to maintain the trim. The question was, were these pictures taken on the same day?
I'm pretty sure I got them from the same file. Shall I just doubly check?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Let's have another look.
Slide 18.
Looks like it. Look at the tuft of hair, but it must have had I don't know what's going on here. It could be. Sometimes I'll document in the morning and I'll get so far and then I'll trim in the afternoon and document then. So yeah, I don't always do things like trim, document, or document, trim, document. I think I did a whole series of photographs in the morning for my website. So we were photographing forever and ever and ever. And you can see the little white spots on the ground are identical. So yeah, they were the same day.
Indeed,
but you might have laid down. I've gone and had a kip when I've come back after lunch and carried on.
No worries. We'll squeeze one more in. It was on the slide about posture and NPA and the hoof. The question was, is a venogram the only way to determine if blood flow has been compromised?
Good question. I don't know. I think it's a good way to see if blood flow has been compromised, because it gives you live information on where the blood is actually traveling to. So I've seen a few venograms where chronically low palmar angle, you literally don't have as much blood flow in the back of the foot, so it simply can't grow sufficient health and sufficient tissues. It's not just about hoof growth. Remember, a lot of the foot is cartilage, and the suspension apparatus of the foot involves cartilage. And if you don't have good health to the cartilage property, the cartilage can't perform as it should, and you can have a sort of downward collapse of the bony column and the whole sort of back of the foot. So the answer is I don't know.
Well, no, appreciate honesty. No, good question.
Yeah.
We'll squeeze one last one in here. I just came through the chat there. We've done the equibiome test on my son's pony. She's had graceful squamous glandular and pyloric ulcers in 4 months' time. She was scoped twice with no improvement. Weaned her off 4 months of omeprazole treatment and then started the equibiome feed in combination with Rayline. Thank you very much for that plug.
Wow.
And this has been a real game changer. So for our pony, the equibiome test has really helped. So
excellent.
Thanks, Ingrid, for firing that.
That is amazing. I mean, I could have talked about our own horses' equibiome testing and our own experience with Reline GI on 2 of ours, but I thought, no, that's not going to. It doesn't really come across well when you're just talking about your own. But we had a similar experience with Reline GI, which is why I was keen to become involved and help Brendan and his team. So yeah, I recommend it to everybody who's got chronic postural changes, and I touch the horse and I kind of ask the horse, are you sore here? What's the horse's response? I get the owner to check so that they can check on a daily basis. So there's questions that you can ask of your horse in a full assessment of your horse's health, and that might tell you information about the state of its kind of internal organs. A lot of horses just don't like being groomed there.
Yeah, very much so.
Good job.
Thanks for that. Well, guys, we are just about out of time, so we did go through most of the questions. Any we didn't, I will send on to Beccy, and she can certainly email directly back to you, no problem at all. Again, if as Beccy put up the end there, we've recorded this, so we'll send you all, for those that did join us and those that didn't manage to join us, a copy of the recording, and that'll have all the references and links there for Beccy's website, and also any of the other support pages and links that you wanted to get access to. So I'll send them out tomorrow once we've downloaded the recording. Again, thanks for everybody for joining us this evening and giving up your time. And again, Beccy, super presentation. Thank you so much for doing that.
Anytime.
Very informative, very great. And on that note, I hope you're all safe and well, and we will bid you good night, and we will let you know when the next one is coming up. It may be Beccy again. But certainly we're going to be looking at the physiological and psychological stress and how that affects the horse too. So thank you very much, everybody, and good night, and we'll see you again very soon. All the very best. Take care. Bye for now. Bye-bye.